Recently, I've been going through the GTA games in the series and sharing my thoughts and experience about them in the channel. And after playing a few games in the franchise, it made me remember about a game that was supposed to fill the void people were asking for in GTA games. An online GTA game with cops and robbers, where you could play with or against other people. This game was GTA Online before GTA Online was even a thing. A game that was created by one of the original minds behind Grand Theft Auto. A game that reportedly cost millions to make. A game so ambitious that it collapsed just months after launch and took its studio down with it. Yet somehow, despite dying, being sold, relaunching, changing owners multiple times, and spending over a decade on life support, it's still alive today. This is the bizarre story of All Points Bulletin, APB. If you're liking this video so far, please be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe because it helps the channel. Let's get into it. In the mid-2000s, the video game industry was on the cusp of a massive shift. Massively multiplayer online games were absolutely exploding, fueled by the staggering success of titles like World of Warcraft. And at that exact same time, games like Grand Theft Auto were cementing themselves as the ultimate cultural phenomenon. Then came an idea for a game that spotlighted a void in the industry. Realtime Worlds, a new studio at the time, asked a simple question. What if thousands of players could live, fight, and claim territory inside a living, breathing GTA-style game? Now, this wasn't just a wild idea from a random nobody. It was from an industry veteran, Dave Jones, the literal creator of the original Grand Theft Auto and the visionary behind Crackdown. And looking back, it felt like the natural, inevitable evolution of multiplayer gaming. But the worry was, who would take on the daunting task of pushing gaming into this new age? So, in 2005, Realtime Worlds released a concept video, secured $100 million in funding, which was one of the highest budgets for a game at the time, and got to work. You also got to remember that at the time, people were hyped about APB, because it promised a level of player influence and creative freedom that no other game had at that time. APB promised to give everyone a massive set of creation tools that allowed people to express themselves in their own way through their character, with one of the deepest character customization ever made at the time, allowing players to adjust everything from body sliders to highly detailed layered tattoo placements. Players could take on standard cars and transform them with complex paint jobs, decals, body kits, and lights to stand out. And you could also build your own audio, so that is the most unique thing ever actually. And there was also a robust design tool that allowed players to create unique gang logos and police badges, which could then be slapped onto clothing, cars, or spray painted on graffiti across the city. The gameplay went away from classic MMO questing and replaced it with a dynamic real-time war for the city of San Paro. Players could choose from two factions, criminals that were tasked with breaking into storefronts, stealing cars, running drugs, and causing general chaos to line their pockets, and the enforcers, vigilantes and private military forces hired to uphold the law by responding to crimes, arresting perpetrators with lethal force when necessary. And instead of waiting in lobbies, the PvP happened seamlessly. If a team of criminals started robbing a bank in the open world, the game's matchmaking system would automatically log it as an active APB. It would then dispatch a nearby squad of enforcers of a matching skill level to respond to the scene, turning a standard heist into a high-stakes, chaotic player-driven fight. For a late 2000s game, APB had promised to be a game that wasn't just an ambitious game design. It was going to be a revolutionary. It promised a world of pure player identity and expression where the community, not the developers, wrote the stories. But some would say that there were no stories because most of the budget went elsewhere. They actually had $100 million to work with, and in 2010, that wasn't just a big budget. That was more than likely a blank check that demanded absolute perfection to justify such a large funding. But instead of focusing on how the game played, Realtime Worlds poured millions into how the game looked. Which isn't actually that bad of an idea. However, they attempted to merge high-speed, Twitch-based action, such as driving and third-person shooting, with traditional MMO server architecture. The netcode simply wasn't built to handle latency-sensitive combat on a massive scale, leading to severe desync, broken matchmaking, and janky hit regs. They were literally trying to build an online game that now in 2026 is a norm for a live service game, all the way back in 2010, a time where the average gaming PC had roughly 2 to 4 gigabytes of RAM. They also went so far with the customization that every custom tattoo, every unique bumper sticker had to be rendered in real time for dozens of players simultaneously, causing severe memory bottlenecks and massive frame drops for the average user, which not only broke the servers, it brutalized the average player's PC to death. In the 5 years of development, APB existed in a state of constant changes. Developers didn't have a cohesive vision for what the minute-to-minute gameplay loop should actually be, resulting in easily exploitable map designs and missions that inherently favored defenders who could pick corners using the third-person camera. And then there was no PvE content, because it was expensive and time-consuming to create, apparently. So the studio ended up leaning almost entirely on PvP to provide endless content. By 2010, the $100 million funding had completely evaporated. Investors needed a return, forcing Realtime Worlds to push APB out the door regardless of its technical state, rampant cheating vulnerabilities, and balancing issues. So, to claw back that $100 million deficit they had, Realtime Worlds had the bright idea to not only ask players to buy the game, they asked them to pay by the hour for the privilege to actually play the game. And let's just say that Realtime Worlds didn't have the same pull Blizzard Games had with World of Warcraft. So, you had to pay, let's say, $50 for the game itself, and then you had to pay a subscription, which is hourly or monthly. For 20 hours, you could pay $6.99, but for 30 days, you can pay $9.99. I get the logic, but it's the dumbest logic ever. In an era where the free-to-play model was gaining massive traction and games like World of Warcraft already dominated subscriptions, asking players to pay twice for an unpolished game killed player retention instantly. And unfortunately for Realtime Worlds, the launch sales missed expectations, and the studio had no safety net, leading to an interesting 80 days that went from global launch on June 29, 2010, where APB officially launches in North America, followed by Europe a few days later. Then, in early July, just a few weeks after the launch, Realtime Worlds quietly begins laying off staff under the guise of streamlining into a live service support team. By August 17th, player numbers had plummeted and debts were mounting. Realtime Worlds officially filed for bankruptcy, and over 150 employees lost their jobs overnight. Finally, September 16th, the community officers announced that despite efforts to find a buyer, the financial burden was too high. The original APB servers were shut down for good, exactly 79 days after launch. But Even though the original studio died, the game itself didn't entirely vanish. The intellectual property was bought by K2 Networks for roughly £1.5 million, a tiny fraction of the original $100 million development budget. K2 Network, also known as Gamers First, decided to pivot. They reduced the entry barrier to $0, instantly solving the population crisis that kills PvP multiplayer games. Then they shifted the monetization to a dual-tier system consisting of a premium membership, yielding progression boosts and design slots, and an item shop for weapons, vehicles, and cosmetics. By lowering the barrier to entry, APB Reloaded managed to cross over 3 million registered users during its early relaunch phase, breathing life back into the game. The resurrection succeeded because Gamers First didn't have to build a game from scratch. They inherited a flawed masterpiece with a pretty loyal base. And while franchises like Grand Theft Auto eventually built massive online modes, they never replicated the dedicated, structured, match-driven cops vs. robbers friction that APB offered. But in 2013, almost overnight, APB suddenly had a fatal problem. The game that was originally pitched to investors as GTA Online before GTA Online existed now had to compete with GTA Online. And it wasn't a fair fight. APB couldn't keep up with GTA Online. Grand Theft Auto 5 launched with an estimated development and marketing budget of over $265 million. APB, on the other hand, was running on the fumes of a bankrupted studio. While its original development under Realtime Worlds famously burned through $100 million, the Reloaded era under Gamers First was operating on a shoestring budget, just trying to keep the servers online. APB was built on a heavily customized version of Unreal Engine 3. This extreme customization created crippling technical issues. When they realized they needed to upgrade to a 64-bit engine just to keep the game functionally modern, it required rewriting thousands of lines of custom code. An engine upgrade that was supposed to take a few months ended up stalling actual development for years. And while Rockstar had thousands of developers across multiple global studios churning out massive heist updates, flying cars, and new weapons, APB Reloaded was managed by a fraction of that workforce. They simply didn't have the manpower to create new missions, map expansions, or meaningful content drops to retain player interest while fighting engine issues. And when players actually compared the two games side by side, the cracks were pretty obvious. APB had one of the greatest character customization systems ever made, but the actual gameplay, the driving and the shooting felt incredibly dated next to GTA 5's polished physics, cover mechanics, and seamless world. Eventually, players gradually moved elsewhere. To be fair, GTA Online's rise wasn't the only thing that killed APB, but it was the reality check for a game that couldn't modernize fast enough to survive in the genre it tried to lead. Then, in 2018, Little Orbit stepped into the picture. After years of APB being in maintenance mode, it felt like the ultimate redemption arc for the game. CEO Matt Scott took a different approach to community management, with transparency, open developer blogs, and an explicit promise to fix the fundamental flaw that had crippled APB Reloaded for nearly a decade with its outdated, hyper-unstable engine. But promising an engine upgrade and executing one on a code base with this much historical baggage are two entirely different beasts. Now, while APB was technically built on Unreal Engine 3, the original dev team had to hack the engine apart to support the game's core selling points. Its open-world MMO matchmaking system and its incredibly complex real-time procedural customization engine. And because the original 2008 architecture was modified so deeply, Little Orbit couldn't just import the game into a newer version of Unreal Engine. They were forced to manually strip out custom code, upgrade individual libraries to bypass the restrictive 4GB RAM ceiling, and attempted to port the game over to Unreal Engine 3.5. In 2019, Little Orbit released an engine upgrade trailer showcasing early progression in Unreal Engine 3.5. The community was ecstatic, believing a launch was just months away. But internal testing revealed massive regressions. While the rendering engine in Unreal Engine 3.5 performed faster in side-by-side tests, the gameplay loop logic itself was an issue. Fixes to texture bugs would break street lamp lighting in certain areas. Fixing the lighting caused massive memory leaks and server disconnects. And by 2025, the project had dragged on for so long that it essentially consumed the studio's development resources. The game survived on a bare minimum skeleton crew, while engineers spent years doing painful, manual line-by-line code reviews just to make the ancient database work with modern hardware. And finally, in 2026, when I revisited the game, I was surprised that it was still active. Well, active is doing a lot of heavy lifting. I went to check the game out, and they were still getting updates. But when I got into the game, it was kind of like a ghost town. Unfortunately, I didn't play much of it, since the game relies on PvP interactions to do missions. I spent around 20 minutes as a level 1, waiting to start a mission, and eventually, I just gave up. And this showed me exactly why APB didn't do well, and never will. There was no PvE, even after 16 years later. But it was still ahead of its time, in some ways. But it's currently trapped in time in other ways. Let me know what you think. Have you played any of the APBs? Original or reboots? Did you like it? What was it like playing back then? Let me know down in the comments, and please be sure to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.